Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Friend Bar and for having me out from New York. Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh have collaborated with me. Thank you. You have no idea how happy I am to be in LA. It's nice to be at the Friend Bar where everyone really, truly, so far has been friendly. I usually do this in New York City. My name is Rebekah Sebastian, and my show is called Yellow Tape, a true crime trivia show. What is it? Well, it's a game I started because I would go to bar trivia in New York and I wouldn't know anything and I would never win. And I thought, if all these categories were about true crime, I would kill. So I decided to create one. And so a couple times a month, I have people come out and we play. We're gonna do 4 rounds tonight. You're gonna see those little answer sheets on your paper, on your table. We're gonna kind of dive right in. In addition to this trivia game, which is kind of our icebreaker and warm-up, the real event tonight is my conversation with Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. After 2 years of doing the trivia show, I did start a true crime podcast because there's not enough, right, in the world, and there was a real felt need. But what I do in Dialogue is explore the why of true crime. Yellow Tape is all about the who, what, where, when. I'm going to be quizzing you on all those things, but Dialogue is the why. And who better to answer those questions than 2 forensic psychologists? Why are we so obsessed with true crime? And if you're here tonight, you probably are, or you love somebody who is, and that's why you're here showing your support. So thank you for being here. We're going to go into round 1. I'm in California, so I couldn't resist a category, and we'll hit that slide. We've got Molly on PowerPoint tonight. Thank you so much, Molly. Oh, here are our official, the doctors are in. That is the event title tonight. And we'll go right into Zero OJ. What does that mean? Well, this is going to be all about the O.J. Simpson case, but here's the big surprise and fun part is O.J. will not be an answer, okay? There's 0 O.J. in the answer. So we're talking the players, the victims, other people surrounding the O.J. Simpson case, okay? So if you're thinking about putting O.J. down, it's wrong. Don't do it. Question number 1, are we ready? Yes. So you're going to write, so there's no, by the way, there's no cheaters here, right? I mean, usually I say this audience is basically detectives. We have actual cops here. So just don't do it. Don't use your phone. And, collaborate with a neighbor if you don't have a team. Okay, 0 J, question number 1. The name of the street where Nicole Brown Simpson lived is also the last name of a notorious serial killer. What is that name? It's not a calling out situation, but I like that you raised your hand. Thank you. It's a write it on the little paper kind of deal. All right, and if you guys think I'm going too fast or need a repeat, I can always do that, okay? So that was the first question. This is how we play. Question number 2, I'm going to read a quote, and you're going to tell me who said it. Here it is. As I listened to the verdicts in the Casey Anthony case, acquitting her of the homicide of her baby girl, I relived what I felt back when the court clerk, Deirdre Robinson, read the verdicts in the Simpson case. But this case is different. The verdict, far more shocking. Why? Because Casey Anthony was no celebrity. Who said it? Who said that? Okay. Curious, thinking faces. Question number 3, on a much lighter note, what celebrity friend of Nicole Brown Simpson would later publish a cookbook in which she features a recipe from the kitchen of Nicole? What celebrity friend of Nicole Brown Simpson would later publish a cookbook in which she features a recipe from the kitchen of Nicole Brown Simpson? It's truly like the only person that would do this. Like, you'll kick yourself when you hear. This is going down. I'm going to hold this. Okay. We're good. Okay, question number 4. Which actor played Dream Team attorney Robert Kardashian on the 2016 FX true crime miniseries The People vs. O.J. Simpson? So this one was a few years ago now. He was playing Robert Kardashian very well, in my opinion. Who was that actor? See how I made this very LA-centric? It's true crime, but it's also some pop culture, some Hollywood. Got sirens. We're so on brand tonight. Okay, the 5th and final question for the 0 OJ category is true or false. We all have a 50% chance of winning here. Lead investigator of the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, Tom Lang, wrote a book called Evidence Dismissed: The Inside Story of the Police Investigation of O.J. Simpson. Is that true or false? So the lead investigator, Tom Lang, wrote a book called Evidence Dismissed: The Inside Story of the Police Investigation of O.J. Simpson. Is that true or is it false? Okay, so does anybody need a reread of 1 through 5?
1.
Question number 1 was the name of the street where Nicole Brown Simpson lived is also the name of a notorious serial killer. What is that name? Number 3 was what celebrity friend of Nicole Brown Simpson would later publish a cookbook in which she features a recipe from the kitchen of Nicole Brown Simpson? If somebody knows the recipe in addition to the answer, I'm going to give them a bonus point. And by the way, in New York, we play for the Innocence Project. Proceeds of our ticket sales go to the Innocence Project. Tonight is excitingly a free event, so we actually have some prizes. But you can look up the Innocence Project and make a donation if you're so inclined and see the good work they do. As I like to say, we love true crime. We hate wrongful convictions. Okay, so that was your OJ. Why don't you switch sheets with a neighbor? So we're going to grade other people's. We're going to go over those answers right now, and that's how we're going to work. And just write at the sheet how many are right. So there's 5 questions, so just write a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 0. Hopefully there's no zeros. So once everybody's swapped up with a neighbor, we're going to go right into the answers. Okay, did anybody know the name of the street where Nicole Brown Simpson lived? Yes. Bundy is the answer. We'll take South Bundy. We can call it Bundy, which of course is also Ted Bundy's last name. So that is what we were looking for. Very good. Question number 2. Did anybody know who said that quote about comparing the verdict to Casey Anthony? Yes? No, I thought we got a Shiloh shout out. No, it was Marcia Clark herself. Yeah. That was Marcia Clark. And the celebrity friend who capitalized on a cookbook, including a recipe from Nicole Brown Simpson. Any ideas who that might be?
Kris Jenner.
You got it. Any idea what the recipe is? It's just nachos. Just a recipe for nachos. I guess they were amazing. I don't know. Question number 4 is which actor played Dream Team attorney Robert Kardashian? Just to bring the whole Kardashian circle fully closed, it is David Schwimmer, yes. And 5th and final, did Tom Lang write that book, Evidence Dismissed?
No.
It is true. He sure did. He sure did. So count up what you got right and put that number in a circle at the top of the page. You can hand those to Shiloh if that's okay. We'll go over the scores at the end. So your number should be a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. No, it's going to be like combined at the end. Yeah, we're going to tally them up.
So they give them to me now?
Yeah. Because there's 5 pages on your table, so rip that one off and we'll go right into category number 2. Yeah, you can hit that and we'll talk. Has anybody listened to Confronting OJ, this podcast? It's so good. I feel like this is the best thing that's come out of that case and been produced in so long. So I just was giving it a little shout out for Kim Goldman. Very victim focused, not so much about OJ Simpson, although they deal with that too. We good? Class, students, everybody? Okay, question and category number. So category number 2, keeping it local on theme, is homicide in Hollywood. Question number 1, if you are ready. What was the original, and that's a key part of this question, what was the original official ruling of Natalie Wood's death? And someone in the back knows. I love her confidence. What was the original official ruling of Natalie Wood's death? All right, question number 2 in Homicide in Hollywood. In 1997, what rapper was killed in Los Angeles just 6 months after Tupac? We'll take all given and assigned names. Yeah, and monikers. In 1997, what rapper was killed in LA just 6 months after Tupac? Okay, it doesn't get more homicide in Hollywood than this. Sharon Tate was murdered by members of the Charles Manson family. Who was she married to at the time? Hollywood legend right here. Okay, question number 4. What SNL character, or cast member I should say, was killed by his wife in 1998? This is multiple choice. Was it Chris Farley, Tim Meadows, or Phil Hartman? Chris Farley, Tim Meadows, or Phil Hartman? This is which SNL cast member was killed by his wife in 1998? Okay, 5th and final. This actress's 1989 murder inspired California laws to change to prevent the DMV from releasing private addresses to help reduce stalking crimes. Who was this actress? 89. So this spurred a whole series of changes to the law, starting with the release of private addresses through the DMV to help reduce stalking crimes. We want to know the victim's name. It was an actress, and the year was 1989. Anybody need a repeat on Homicide in Hollywood? You guys are so quiet and polite. I'm used to a much rowdier crowd. Number 3, Sharon Tate was murdered by members of the Manson family. Who was she married to at the time? There's hands raising tonight. It's very adorable. I love it. Any other repeats? We're gonna. No. There's lots of calling out and elbowing. Any more?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Right. All right. Do we need a number 4? Did I mishear anybody? We got it. Okay, we're gonna go right into these answers. So trade with a neighbor. Get ready to hear the answers. Starting with the original official ruling of Natalie Wood's death. Once we're all swapped up, that was accidental drowning. And it has since been changed. So the right answer is accidental drowning, but it is now undetermined. They are leaving it open to other possibilities given new evidence and stories that are happening. So the right answer is accidental drowning. What if you just wrote drowning? I'm gonna give it to you.
What about if you just said accidental?
Because I don't, can you, no, that's a no. Because there's lots of accidents that is not specific enough, and I can't think of an intentional drowning, but that would be a suicide. I don't know. Okay, so we're clear. It's either accidental drowning or drowning is correct, but just accidental is not. Okay, 97, which rapper was killed in LA just 6 months after Tupac? That was Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, Christopher Wallace. However you know and love him, we'll take that answer. And finally, or not finally, 3rd, Sharon Tate, of course, was married to the famous director. You got it, Roman Polanski. And did anybody know the SNL character who was murdered by his wife? Yes, that was right. C is the correct answer, Phil Hartman. And finally, this actress whose murder in 1989 changed these laws to reduce stalking. Anybody remember her name? Yes, very good. I'm so pleased to hear people know her name, Rebekah Schaeffer. So that is Homicide in Hollywood. Circle the number that they got right, pass it back to the neighbor. As we move into round 3, you guys are good. You're on it. It's just a neighbor. So, and you know what? Did people put their names on these or a team name in the beginning? Did I neglect to mention that part of it? Put one on there now and put the same one on both your papers so we know whose are whose. But this is like an informal shouting out of numbers of who's right. So you have your neighbors, or you should have your original back now, or a new paper. Shiloh's gonna take the graded ones. And we can hit the next slide. Oh, there's the Hollywood murder mystery. And we're going to go into category number 3, which is ripped from the headline. So if you don't like true crime, but you've seen a headline lately, this might be your category. Okay, let's start right with Felicity Huffman recently received her sentence for her crimes related to the college admissions scandal. How long is her sentence? How long will Felicity Huffman have a book? The question is, in addition to a podcast called The Dropout, an HBO doc called The Inventor, Elizabeth Holmes and her company Theranos is also at the center of what 2019 book by John Kerry? He is a Wall Street Journal writer, and this is Elizabeth Holmes, of course, from Theranos, Bay Area, big fraud. Got it? Okay, so we're looking for the book title there. And the third question, this is pretty recent news. The FBI recently named this man as the country's most prolific serial killer with 50 confirmed murders, but potentially 43 more. They are open and looking into this based on their discussions. The FBI recently named this man the country's most prolific serial killer with 50 confirmed murders, but there are a potential 43 more, according to the perpetrator. Okay, question number 4. The HLN network plans to roll out brand new 30-minute episodes of this cult favorite TV show. So it's an existing show, but new ones are coming, and HLN just announced it. Brand new 30-minute episodes of this cult favorite TV show. What is that TV show? Coming soon on the HLN network. No affiliation. All right, 5th and final, and this is, last week recent. On September 30th, a woman called the police saying she found an SD card containing pictures and videos of another woman being strangled, beaten, and raped. This SD card was labeled homicide at Midtown Marriott. Very organized person. In what state did this crime occur? So just a woman, a citizen, saw a little SD card, thought to pick it up, decided to look at it. In what state did this happen? Someone knows. So there's 50 states, and if you're not sure, you can pick one, and we'll see how it goes for you. That was the 5th. Does anybody need a repeat on Ripped from the Headlines? All right, swap with a neighbor. Make sure your name's on that page so you get it back. You can jump to the next slide. It's just a breaking news. Okay, so Felicity Huffman, anybody know what her sentence is?
2 weeks.
2 weeks is right, 14 days. Yep, pretty short. Waiting to hear about Lori Loughlin's with bated breath. The next question is, what is the name of the book about Elizabeth Holmes by John Kerry? In addition to all the other content that's been put out about her is?
Bad Blood.
Bad Blood, great book. If you are interested in that case, this goes so far in the weeds. It's dense, it's good. I recommend it. And the newly titled, I guess, most prolific serial killer. Samuel Little is right. That's. No, it's not. It's I don't know that he had a moniker. Do we know Samuel Little? I don't. If they called him anything else, not that I've heard. They haven't. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this show, HLN, releasing new episodes of not everyone's, but many people's favorite, Forensic Files. So we have that to look forward to. And then this crazy story of the SD card. I don't know if you would pick up an SD card if you found it. I don't know that I would, but now I'm going to. This happened in the state of Alaska. Yes. Yep. So our winner tonight, in first place, Dan, Justine, and Maureen. They are welcome to come up and look at, we've got t-shirts and magnets for you to take. And our second place runner-up is Scott's team. Scott, your table is second place. I don't know if you want an Ellie Not So Confidential t-shirt, but you're welcome to a magnet. And your table mate can take whatever she wants. And that's how we play Yellow Tape, a true crime trivia show. Come up, grab your prizes, and we are going to move into the interview in about 2 minutes. So Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh, you're up. Now we're transitioning into this part of the show, which is called Dialogue, a true crime conversation. These two are people I have had the pleasure of speaking with off the mic many times, and new friends, but we've gotten to know each other, and I love their work. And so when I started Dialogue, I was hoping they would be guests, because I have a few questions, and they all center around whys, the whys of true crime, and I truly can't think of anyone better to answer them than two forensic psychologists who work within police agencies and are true crime fans themselves. So maybe we could start there. Maybe each of you, why don't we talk a little bit about what each of you does, because it's similar, but there are differences and in different capacities. So maybe Scott, you could start off talking about your career, and then Dr. Shiloh? Okay.
Do you mean currently, or?
Yeah, brief intro
I was
into.
born in a dirt floor cabin.
No, we don't have that much time.
Okay.
You're very young,
No.
so it wouldn't be that long. But talk about your career, where you are now, and kind of how you got there.
So we have to be a little discreet for purposes of broadcast, but I partner with a law enforcement agency, and I'm part of another agency as a clinical psychologist. But
That's very vague.
agency. Okay.
What kind of agency?
So I work with a mental health agency as a clinical psychologist, but the work that I do is forensic, which is the intersection between psychology or mental health and the legal system. And what I do is I partner with a law enforcement officer or detective, and what we do is follow up in the community after a precipitating event that could be something that escalates into a violent interaction or a high-risk situation. And what we do is we make sure that the individual or individuals have connection to resources. Once we've cleared that they're not going to be moving through the judicial system, we get them the help that they need. That's
Okay.
That's kind of the boring answer. The exciting answer is that we're constantly evaluating risk. We get everyday referrals for school threats, for nascent terrorist threats, for very, very mentally ill individuals in the community who may or may not be a risk to themselves or to others.
Okay. Dr. Shiloh?
All right. So I'm a law enforcement psychologist. I've been doing that for just a couple of years now. And so what that means is I do work with a very large law enforcement agency here in California. So I provide clinical services to them, meaning they can come in for therapy on their own, or sometimes if they've been involved in an incident that mandates that they come in for some sort of debriefing, they would come in after that for a very short-term type session. That's one prong of what I do. I also consult with individual divisions within the department, which means I can provide training for them if they feel like morale is down and they want some direction as far as how to maybe address that with employees. Maybe I'll collaborate with a commanding officer or a captain on how to do that. And then the last part, probably the most fun part of my job, is that I get to be on the crisis negotiation team. So this happens very rarely.
We define fun in different ways, but that's cool.
This is the most rare part of my job, but it definitely is the most intense and most fun. So whenever we have a barricaded suspect or a suicidal subject where the negotiation team is called out, a psychologist is always there to consult with the negotiators in real time. They don't ever let us on the phone with the subjects. Very, very, very rare cases, so I'm hoping to do that one day. That's one of my goals. But yeah, that's a little bit about what I do now. I do have a small forensic psychology practice still, where I see individuals who have been charged with sexual offenses and are getting ready basically to go to prison. So that's what I did before I came to law enforcement psychology. So I still keep my foot in the door a little bit with that.
Okay, so you're both doing very frontline work and serving populations that certainly need it and are at risk, and it does sound fun. You did tell me some of those stories, and it's exhilarating is maybe the word I would use. So your podcast co-hosts together, Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh, are LA Not So Confidential. So maybe talk about how your work has overlapped and who decided we should start a podcast. A true crime podcast. Okay, pointing to Dr. Shiloh.
I did. So we met 10 years ago at our internship, which was in South Los Angeles, working at a facility where we were working in treatment and assessment of sexual offenders who were coming back into the community after being in prison.
Or about to go.
Or about to go, like the individual I was telling you that I see. So Scott and I spent a grueling I wish it was an hour sometimes, a grueling year doing that, and then kind of went our own ways after graduation and internship. And
I went to prison.
Scott went to prison. I stayed out.
For credit and hours, we're hoping?
for a salary,
For a
which
paycheck.
was great.
Okay.
That was cool.
And then a couple of years ago, we found ourselves both working in downtown Los Angeles. Of course, we had remained very good friends during that time, saw each other often, but here we were working essentially with the same agency, within the same proximity, to where we could go to lunch like during our work day. And that's when we started chatting about it.
And I mean, just to circle back around to how we met, the job that we had in South LA was super intense. I mean, it's an internship, so it's not like you go into an internship where you're expected to know everything. You're supposed to come in with your basic academic education and some training and some hours behind you, but then you are being taught how to do an entirely new spectrum of treatment and evaluation. And it was super, super intense. And it was one of these, we had a fantastic supervisor, clinical director, that kind of prepared us, because you're hearing really, really rough stuff, especially working with sex offenders. You're hearing some things that really, the general public never really comes in contact with. And I feel like that's sort of one of the things that, we were in the trenches. We were like, it was high pressure, and certainly everything that we were doing there was mandated by state and federal law for treatment. So we really had to be on the straight and narrow, and we were a great support to each other. She also got my humor immediately. I said something incredibly raunchy and gross the first day, and she just kind of laughed and wiggled her eyebrows. I knew we were going to be friends.
It might be a coping mechanism, dealing with what you are facing and seeing, and I'm sure that plays into your podcast now, because certainly it's educational and informative. I love learning from your show, but there's a casual rapport between you and sometimes a levity that is a welcome respite from the pretty dark subject matter that you both face in your work.
Right.
So that comes through, which I think people appreciate. So what's your intention with the podcast when you're like, well, we have this work, we do these things that maybe people don't understand, and so let's apply it to some like cultural touch points or places where people might be interested? Was that the idea, or you tell me?
I don't know about intention. I think that I felt like there was a void in the true crime podcast world, which, like you were talking about earlier, very saturated. However, there was no one else doing anything forensically.
No.
No one that was currently working in the field in that work to be able to talk about the concepts that are happening in these cases and talk about the diagnosis that we all, wonder about and are fascinated with. And so it just seemed like there was a void, and that we could fill it with kind of bringing not only what we're doing now, but our other backgrounds, because being a former police officer myself, I was able to sort of look at that side of it. We love all of the true crime documentaries and series and everything that's out there, and like to critique that too, and or talk about it. It's kind of fun to look at a true crime case, look at the psychological concepts, but then also talk about the miniseries that they just did on it.
Right.
Or some great movie that's always been around on it. And so Scott's entertainment background was great for that.
But also, I mean, when she suggested, we were walking down the street after lunch one day, probably just maybe a little over 2 years ago, and she made the suggestion. I was immediately, no. There's two. I don't even know. I don't want to learn to do something new right now. And Shiloh's take on it was like, look, there's one quote unquote forensic psychology podcast out there, and the young woman is trying to do a good job, but she doesn't have the training, she doesn't have the expertise, and she's basically just reading out of the DSM. And then I started thinking about all the ones I had listened to that I really liked, but you would be listening to it and going, that's wrong. Because you would have people that were truly interested in true crime and, the psychological underpinnings, and they would read, anybody can get your hands on the research if you know how to use, academic Google or Google Scholar, but you don't understand how to apply those principles to the different situations. And the more I thought about it, and it was within a block and a half. Like
Yeah,
literally.
it didn't take them long to
Yeah,
think
you
about
made it sound like you really went through a long
within a
journey
block
of
and a half,
consideration.
I was
but
like, okay, LA Confidential.
I'm ready to do
LA
this.
Not So Confidential. Let's look for
Yeah.
that. And they were like, I'm on
Okay.
Squarespace
So the
looking for
name
domain
came
names.
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very
so
quick.
so part of it is your ability to communicate as communicators to present that information in a bit more of a digestible and factual manner, but also in a way people can access and grab onto.
That's the intention.
Right.
I hope it
Yeah,
comes across.
that is what comes across. That's what I'm yeah.
And it's not
I'm
about
suggesting.
dumbing it down either,
Nope.
because people are much more savvy, especially if you're already in this genre. You're probably have already educated yourself to some extent on some of these ideas. But what we want to do is expand on it and tell
Right.
people, let people in on the latest research. And we have to keep ourselves. Psychology is one of the areas of science that has the largest arc of learning required constantly, because data constantly changes our science. So we were talking about, we did an episode on Stockholm Syndrome, and within a week and a half, Shiloh was like, we got to record another episode because there's more that just
New
came out.
information.
Because we
Okay.
reached out to the experts that we thought we were going to go in and go, hey, you're wrong on this, and we got schooled a little bit, which is cool, because we're both open to learning.
Okay, so some things are evergreen and they're going to hold fast for a long time, but there's just going to be a lot of changes with new information and new
Right.
research, and you have a responsibility to impart that then if
Right.
you've add something else
Absolutely.
out. Okay. So before we get too far into some burning questions I have, I would like to know for each of you, because it seems your true crime obsession, if you will, informs your work, and your work might inform the other. But what is the first case you remember that kind of sparked your interest, that you've never forgotten, maybe turned you on to the genre, book or movie? Do each of you have one of those?
So I was living in Chicago in the late 80s, and I remember being home in my apartment on an afternoon when Oprah was on, and this was before Oprah was enormous, but was becoming a thing, and she certainly was a thing it's probably like 86 or 87.
Okay.
So she's got this guy on that she starts talking to, and I had never heard about any of this case. It was Ray Buckey from the McMartin Preschool, which is a Southern California preschool that had been around since the late 60s all the way through the 80s. And he and his family had been accused of unbelievably horrible sexual molestation of all the kids that had been at that school. And by this time he had been exonerated. He'd been exonerated of all but some charges that weren't even sexually related. And and this was long before I was in the field of psychology. I was working as a performer. I was in a dance company in Chicago, and I remember sitting there going, that guy's innocent. I had never seen anybody just look so flummoxed. I mean, he's also was not a particularly bright individual. So it didn't even have, and not that I was the most savvy young man either, but you can tell when someone is not, a dumb person can't lie very well, in my experience. And even at that point, I recognized this is really messed up, and it stuck with me for years, because it was the first time I ever thought, wait, you can go to prison for something you didn't do? You can get accused of something? That's how naive I was at that time, and that was the sort of the turning point for me to get me interested in it.
And I don't think that was naive. I think that was just not shared, and that wasn't widely communicated information, and it's only in recent years, and that is something exciting I see happening, is kind of exposing. True crime is not just murder cases anymore, it's also exposing things in our own system that have been broken for a long time, and
Right.
like wrongful convictions. And that ends up tying into your career so much, having working with sex offenders. So that's really interesting that stayed with you. How about you, Dr. Shiloh?
I think I kind of have two, in the sense of like what made me aware the earliest that I can remember, and that would have been, again, very Los Angeles based, being 6 years old in 1984, and I remember sitting in my dad's living room when I was at his house on the weekend and hearing that Richard Ramirez had been caught.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I think my parents did a great job at shielding me from too much Richard Ramirez stuff that was happening that summer. And I remember being very scared because they're, of course, recapping all of the horrific things that had happened. And my dad just telling me, no, it's okay because he's been caught now. So that's very early. Not that it was an obsession, but I just feel like it's my earliest memory. And as therapists, we always ask people, right, what's your earliest memory? And it's linked to true crime. But I think the first case, if we use the word obsession, and I know it's cliche, but it would be John Benet Ramsey. And probably still my touchstone obsession. If I could have one question answered in my lifetime, it would be that. I don't care about the meaning of life.
You
I
just
care
want to
about-
know who killed John Benet.
Right. Right.
Do you have a strong feeling about who did that you care to share? You don't have to.
So it happened in 1996. I graduated from high school that year. It didn't, and not until a few years later when I would say the obsession began, when I was reading every book I could get my hands on, because by then books had been published, as well as just being on forums every single day when I was at work and discussing the case with people and discussing theories. And I was very drawn and confused in those times. And with everything that's been out there, I am still in that same exact place.
So you don't know.
I don't lean either way. I have from
Interesting.
time to time, but I'm still, split between all of the theories.
Okay, that's fair. I've moved a little bit more towards that too in later years. So the big question is why? Why do you think you got so obsessed with that case in particular? But I'm asking this more broadly to all of us. I mean, literally hundreds of people a month at my shows, and between that and now podcasting numbers are getting bigger of people who are obsessed with this. And as psychologists, what do you think it is? I ask all my guests this, and so I like lay people answers too, but I'm very curious from your perspective, what is drawing us and captivating us in these stories?
I think that there's no one particular reason. I think it can come from several different areas, and it's going to be different for every person. And certainly, the conference that we were at this summer with hundreds of fans of true crime, every one of them, was into it for a different reason. But there's a lot of actual, because this has become such a phenomenon, there are things that other psychologists that specifically work on research that have come up with. I think that they all kind of boil down to about 4 different areas.
Okay.
But one of them is certainly, when we look at the statistics, that the primary audience for true crime is women.
Yep.
And there's a reason for that, because it is a testing ground emotionally and intellectually on a conscious or an unconscious level of keeping yourself safe. Women have a much more of a challenge in keeping themselves safe in our society than men do.
So we're watching almost as observers to incorporate practices
Absolutely.
for future use
Being
potentially.
hypervigilant is
Self-protection.
probably a biological imperative. I really do feel like, and there's some research to back this up, we're theorizing now that this is actually part of our genetics. It's part of our makeup to be hypervigilant, to take in as much stimuli around us as possible so that we can make an informed decision about what level of risk we are at.
Okay.
So there's other things that you want to look at these sort of horrific situations to calm yourself, because you can say, well, I'm not that. I'm not stupid enough to be that victim, or I won't let myself be that victim, and, well, I would never do something like that. So it calms us down, like, because there is a reaction if you're an anxious person to immediately think you've done something wrong, and am I capable of engaging in these kind of behaviors, or am I capable of torturing and killing someone? Well, no, not likely. That's only a small part of the population, an infinitesimally small section of the
I
population.
challenge that theory just a little bit, and I know that's kind of the hot one right now, but men are still the victims of violent crime and murder at the hands of other men.
At a
Far
higher
and above,
rate. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
More
higher rate,
often.
more often than women are.
Okay.
And so I wonder what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right.
You know, all of this media and TV shows and miniseries, forensic files always choosing a crime against a woman, did that then make us scared to where we're now digesting the material more?
But that's also a good point too, is because at the same time that true crime across forms of media has increased, that is almost concurrent. I'm not going to say there's correlation. I mean, there's correlation, there's not causation, but we're talking about a 24-hour news cycle that did not exist before, right? So we live now in a world where there's 24-hour news, and you've got to generate content, and so it's always going to be, if it bleeds, it leads, which is sort of, it inculcates it into our psyches, I think.
So, Dr. Shiloh, do you have a different alternative theory on why women lead the genre? Because it's true. I mean, we are going to CrimeCon next year, and I was there this year. 85% of the 4,000 attendees were women, and that's who's watching. So if it's not a self-protection, what do you think it is?
I don't know specifically when we talk
Just
about
on
women.
a gut level, maybe, like, I don't know.
I don't know with women in particular. I think with the genre being so hot, and maybe it's at its peak and its bubble right now.
Sure.
I kind of get that feeling. Everyone has their own reason. It is very hard for me to step outside of that. I grew up in a law enforcement family, so it's always been there for me to step back and say, why is it? I think we are all fascinated with human behavior. At just that basic level, we can compare and contrast ourselves. But then when you layer criminal behavior on top of that, it's even more interesting. Could we be capable of that? Who chooses to be that way and why? And then we ask the follow-up questions. And then for me, the sort of the trifecta layer for that was criminal sexual behavior, and that's where my interest was honed in. We have our own stories and experiences and backgrounds that probably shape all of that. But I don't know. I don't know.
That's fair. Dr. Scott, you mentioned there were 4 things you were thinking that maybe contribute to the collective obsession. And I think we got to one of them. Do you know the other 3? Can you share what those other factors were?
We actually hit a couple. I think
you did? Okay.
it's a protective.
Uh-huh.
It's an exercise. It's a sort of a subconscious or unconscious exercise to push against the darkness of your life. I think that there's a zeitgeist of it right now. That's one of the big factors right now. It's the spirit of the times. And the spirit of the times is dictated by what's going on politically and socioculturally in the world. And then I'm fascinated by the idea that it might be a biological imperative, like, that this is something that, just because I come from a highly anxious background, so I'm already
on guard.
What's going to go wrong? Who's after me?
Yeah.
Right. So I can.
It's feeding that almost,
I
like
think so.
fueling that innate that some of us are wired with, or maybe all of humans are, and some more than others.
I mean, one part of it that I think is interesting, that is a sort of like an offshoot of this whole, and we'll talk about this more in an upcoming episode, but there's actually a term called hybristophilia, which is women who are attracted to incarcerated men.
Oh, that's a thing, right?
That's an actual thing.
Yeah.
And it's
love after lockup.
Yeah, and after you talk to some of these women, and it's just amazing that it's almost on the verge of delusion about how they feel about the relationship. Oh, well, I know. He's really a nice guy. He might have, dismembered those 4 women, but, that would never happen to me.
Some
He's just
willingness to look
misunderstood.
I
past
can
minor
change him.
flaws. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the idea that I can change him, and I think this genre, it's also like a thrill ride. I mean, like your body is incredibly smart and incredibly dumb at the same time. So the same chemicals come out of your head when you're going over a roller coaster as they do when you're being chased by a wolf, right? It's just the context of the situation.
Okay.
So we all like that thrill. and we're experimenting with fear. So I think that this is one of the ways that we do it. It's why we have Lifetime television, why we have
So there's
Oxygen.
some pleasure center being triggered on some level? We're enjoying it?
It's an adrenaline rush. I
Yeah.
think people, it's a
Okay.
way to get an adrenaline
Yeah,
rush.
that makes sense to me. So we're kind of hitting on it, but what do you think the under the surface not reasons, but what are we talking about when we talk about true crime? Because most people aren't talking about just murder anymore. So many things go into most cases, and just what do you think some of those are?
I think it's changing now. I think it was, let's look at these horrific stories and look at it as sort of this freak show. And now we're starting to realize there are real people involved. I'm attending CrimeCon with victims' families or families of people who are still missing and they don't have answers, and it becomes very real. The interaction technology is changing that, where you can go on Twitter and you can talk to people and join their group for trying to find their missing loved one.
Yeah.
It's sort of reshaping it in a different way to where maybe, I don't know, empathy is now taking over, and we're trying to not highlight or glorify serial killers like we would love to just give more attention to victims and their stories, and we're being drawn to those now. So
Right.
I even think what are we talking about is changing too.
I think that there is actually something really great that can come of this, because it can educate people. You know, right now, like you're talking about, so it's sort of the idea of understanding white-collar crime and how certain individuals in our population get away with white-collar crime at a way higher rate
Yeah.
than anybody else. And a perfect example is one of my friend Dan, who's probably in the restroom right now, he's over around here somewhere. Dan turned me on to a podcast that I would not have normally listened to. It's called, it's about multi-level marketing. Dan.
The Dream.
Dan,
It's called
The
The
Dream.
Dream. Yeah, I
It's the
listened to
dream.
it. Yeah.
So
I got you, Dan.
He came over to me one day at work and he goes, "You got to listen to this. Your blood is going to boil. Your blood is going to boil." And it was like, it's unbelievable how many hundreds of thousands of people get taken advantage of by these
Yeah.
companies that have enormous tax breaks, and they're run by sociopaths. It is absolute, and
gonna
some
get
of them
to
are
that.
religious organizations, and
It's predatory.
it's completely predatory,
Yeah.
and it preys on the poorest people in our society. And that, to me, as a psychologist, that's fascinating to me, for why people can be so willing to believe something that's completely delusional. You're not going to get rich selling this shitty makeup if you live in a completely depressed area. And I can't legally say it's a pyramid scheme because they'll come sue me. But
Right, and in addition to the financial and monetary incentives they put out there, I feel like they prey on this desire for connection as well, just to be part of something,
Right,
of a community,
to connect.
and in places where there's not a lot going on, and all kinds of things. But yeah, I would say it's totally predatory
yeah.
behavior. So we've gotten close to it, so I kind of just want to delve right in. The real reason I asked you all here is because
One question that comes down to
yeah,
that.
it's a burning question, if you will. And I consume a lot of true crime content. I've read lots, I watch lots, I listen to a lot, and I can't keep straight the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. And I think we use those words incorrectly, liberally, casually, flippantly, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us, and us being lay people, are wrong a lot of the time. So I would love to understand once and for all, what is the difference between a sociopath, a psychopath? Do they overlap? And could you point to some examples? So people we know and love, probably the lunatics we weren't able to hear, I'm guessing a lot of those people would fall under one of those categories. So can we explore
Yes.
this together?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
I know it's a lot.
Well, it is and it isn't. I want to give you the short answer, which is there is no difference. It
Between
depends.
socio and psycho?
Correct. That
Okay.
it's just verbiage, and it depends
Okay.
which professional you ask and what they studied.
So are they interchangeable, the terms?
Yes, they are. Okay, so Scott just used sociopath. I never used it, and we talked about this in one of our episodes, that just when he came into mental health earlier than I did. Even when I came into mental health, I wasn't planning on being a psychologist, so I was checked out a little bit on some things. But I love the way that neuroscientist James Fallon, not Jimmy Fallon, James Fallon
I wish he would weigh in on this.
describes it, because he says it's like like the term vegetable.
Okay.
It's not scientific, but you know what a vegetable is when I say vegetable, yet there's different variations of it.
Okay.
So with either sociopath or psychopath, there is no official diagnosis for that.
Really?
Correct. You can't.
So we all can just keep slapping it on whoever we want, ex-boyfriends, brothers.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
of course.
Sure. Okay, cool.
Because you're not ethically
Just so we're
bound
clear.
by anything.
Just so we're
You
clear.
can, we can.
Okay.
So there's no diagnosis for it, and different professionals in the mental health field will actually, some people will say it doesn't exist, we don't have enough information yet. However, if you ask people who are sociologists, and when they look at human behavior and sort of the worst and what we think of when we think of a psychopath, they will choose to use the word sociopath because they're looking at external factors that are influencing that. So the nurture rather than the nature pieces. And we now know, and we're starting to understand that it's a hybrid.
Okay.
And if we really want to look at research and kind of boil that down, there's sort of 3 hallmarks or 3 criteria, and 2 of those are nature and 1 of them is nurture. So
Great. Okay.
if you ask maybe someone who is a psychologist, they're going to say psychopath because they're looking at more of innate, maybe biological, organic reasons for the people that we deem psychopaths to be psychopaths.
And does the ratio of those contributing factors change if you're talking about, if a sociologist is talking about a sociopath? Like, would it be more nurture?
No, so what we have, the most up-to-date information that we have now is that it is essentially a combination of genetic. So there's a gene, the MAO-A gene, which is known as the aggression gene or the warrior gene.
Okay.
And so that is responsible for aggression, and a lot of people that score high on a test that we do have for measuring traits of psychopathy have that gene. Also, if we look at brain mapping, so we see differences with their frontal lobe. There's not a ton of activity in that area when we're talking about impulse control and executive functioning and decision making. Plus, there are some areas regarding aggression that light up more for them and people who don't score high on those tests. So those are the 2 nature biological factors.
Okay. And then
The third
factor?
leg of that stool is severe childhood trauma. So there you
Okay.
go with your nurture or lack of nurture if we're talking about trauma.
Okay.
But so yes, I guess I would go back and say yes, they're interchangeable in the sense we don't really use psychopath or sociopath anymore. Psychopath is a preferred term. Sociopath was starting to be used at a time in which we were looking at a lot of the world and psychology and society's influence. So it sort of had its heyday, but we need to phase it out and just use one term so people aren't confused.
But,
Yeah,
but we
thank
do
you.
have the diagnostic criteria. If we were going to do look at a personality disorder, we would say it's an antisocial personality disorder, and it has nothing to do with whether or not somebody is gregarious and interactive
Okay.
with their colleagues.
Yes.
It's about key criteria, showing concern for others, having the ability to be empathic with others.
Pervasive disregard for just others' well-being and caring what happens to them at all.
And so
And-
where is this playing into, let's say, charges of a crime? Is that last diagnosis you mentioned, the antisocial one, the one they're going to go with in terms of a diagnostic? Does that play in, I would imagine that plays into someone's
Well, like,
conviction and...
I mean, there have been multiple studies in men's prisons that, like, the vast majority of male inmates meet a lot of the criteria for antisocial personality disorder.
Oh.
But they're not all psychopaths.
Exactly, they're not all.
Okay.
If they were deemed to be psychopathic, they would have antisocial personality disorder. But when I make that distinction, those aren't interchangeable.
But
either.
like, talk about the nurture issue. If somebody was brought up in a criminal family or a crimogenic atmosphere
Uh-huh.
without any other sort of field of reference, then that's going to be their baseline for normal.
Yeah.
But they may not have the brain structure for it, but they have the
Innately.
socialization for it.
Okay, so just to throw another thing into this, where does narcissism rub elbows here?
Ooh, talk about narcopath.
Or does it?
The term narcopath.
Well, we have another unofficial
Yeah.
term that's sort of a hybrid called a narcopath, which is the narcissistic sociopath. And so a narcissist is one that doesn't, a narcissist is going to be way more able, let me back up, one of the hallmarks of someone with antisocial personality disorder is if you ask someone with ASPD, hey, do the rules apply to you? Like I have to come to work every morning at 8 a.m. and I have to clock in and I got to do this. Most of the time, if someone with antisocial personality disorder will kind of shockingly go, no, rules don't
Okay.
apply to me.
No, I'm gonna park in the red zone. I'm gonna park in the loading zone. I'm gonna, because I don't play by that.
It's
So
just
they're other in their minds.
they're absolutely other. So
Okay.
and that's a parallel with someone who is a narcissist is that they feel that they are other, but they are other because nobody else really exists. Everything, I as a narcissist, I'm the center of my universe, and everything around me is basically in my orbit.
Okay, can we have some examples now? Let's talk lunatics. We'll go through the ones that we didn't get to hear. So one of them was O.J. Simpson. So you've never met him, I presume. Would you be able to assign a label accurately, or what does he demonstrate in terms of traits?
I'm so glad you formed it that way.
Oh, I listen to your
'Cause
podcast.
God forbid we diagnose someone we haven't evaluated ourselves.
Right. So presenting, what's he?
Well, he presents to the world definitely as a narcissist, but the traits of both are going to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both psycho
Great.
and sociopath, or
No.
narcopath?
No, narcopath.
Right,
We're talking
narcissist
narcopath. Okay.
and psychopath.
Okay. And how about somebody, this is always the darkest, in my opinion, a family annihilator is as dark as it gets. Are there consistent presenting attributes in somebody who is able to kill their family, their children, and spouse? Or is that something else entirely?
No, I think that would be more towards narcissist, because the family is really a narcissist, regardless of how good of a provider or how good of a parent they are, really only understands people in their orbit as objects, not as individual sentient beings. I mean, on a base level, they just don't see it that way. You're an object, you're a cup, you're my hand. Why aren't you doing what I tell you to do? My hand should do what I want it to do,
Okay.
right? So when we look at somebody like, what's the Paris family out in Paris that's currently under adjudication?
Turpins.
The Turpin family. That I'm struck by not so much Louise Turpin, but the dad. He really presents with a lot of the narcissistic traits, and I mean, and not to be, I want to always be careful about criticizing people's looks, because looks are a very sort of subjective thing, and how you dress and carry yourself. But if you look at his presentation, he seems like he got stuck at like 13 years old. He has a 13-year-old's
stunted?
hairstyle.
Okay.
And everything is about his presentation. This guy is, he would clean up the kids and bring them out once a year for one big trip to Disneyland, and they would get remarried every year. And so everything about that, including like the neglect of the children, really reflects a real strong narcissistic trait.
Because if those people, even if their children and family members aren't serving them anymore, in the sense of like, oh, now you're in my way because I have a girlfriend.
Yeah.
Were there other
Just like
lunatics
we
on
see,
there?
Scott Peterson.
Right, Scott Peterson or Chris Watts. Then I don't need you anymore.
Okay.
And I'll chop you out of my life like I would chop my arm off if it stopped working.
One of the things in the Turpins that seems to be coming up is that as soon as the children kind of aged out of like the cute toddler phase, the parents completely neglect. They just became invisible.
Some inability to connect anymore, or?
Yeah, or a child gives you. I mean, a child is not always, it's sometimes a child cries, sometimes a child is difficult to soothe, but a child pretty much is always, close to the mom, close to the dad.
And beholden.
Right, but like almost as if they were kind of holding a baby doll. And once it wasn't a doll anymore, they couldn't really connect to it, it seems. At least
let's chain it to a bed and then go have another kid.
Right, start the whole process over again.
Case.
I don't know this Turpin Paris thing, so I'm going to have to look that
brutal.
up on my way home.
It is.
Okay.
It's brutal.
There were several children that were rescued from being entrapped in their own home for
Didn't something like
years.
that happen in California recently too?
Yeah.
Paris, California.
Oh, we're talking about, okay, then I do know. I'm like, wow, we're going international today.
PRRIS.
Not a French case, a Parisian in California. Okay, so we were tracking. I'm like, that sounds suspiciously like a local case. Okay, so what about nonviolent crimes? I kind of want to end with white collar you were talking about earlier. So how about Elizabeth Holmes? What are we seeing present there?
So she's fascinating. I mean,
Truly.
just absolutely fascinating.
Agreed.
Because I remember, because I work with a great group of people, and a lot of us are like listening and watching to a lot of the same things, so we can have sort of the water cooler discussions the following day. And diagnostically, we talk about her, and first you think, well, she's just a narcissist, like nothing, and she's a lifelong narcissist, nothing, she's never wrong about anything. And what I found fascinating is somebody else came up with the theory that she's delusional, that it's not so much narcissism driving it, that she believes her own ability to
tend
do
to
this
agree
thing
with that, yeah.
all these professors, all these experts have told her, no, that is not physically possible. A computer cannot do this with
Yeah.
blood, and she would never accept it. And she wasn't a medical professional. She had no medical training, no biological background. She was only sort of in computer sciences,
Yeah.
and she would not accept it. And when that was theorized, I was like, yeah, that really feels accurate.
Because high-functioning delusional people, they're not like walking around with tin foil hats on all the time thinking they've been abducted by aliens. They can have delusions that you go, is it real?
Right, they're probably
presenting-
they're probably running companies. I mean, is it misguided? I see also, I wonder the line between delusional and cult leader. And I'm not saying Elizabeth Holmes is a cult leader. Theranos wasn't a cult. It was it? No, it wasn't. But I'm saying, is that what's happening in a cult leader? That the buy-in to their own vision,
I
that
think
surely other people will.
Some cult leaders at some point will
Yeah.
absolutely start believing their own BS.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if she did, because there's indications if you read the books and listen to the podcast, she was savvy enough to know that she had to keep all of her employees separated from each other.
Right.
So that there was no transparency in communication. Everything had to come through her office. So I'm still leaning towards the delusional, but not a culty type, just that. And I also think, like, here she is, she's from a rich family, she went to an Ivy League school, she was in the Ivy League milieu, and she was an attractive, blonde hair, blue-eyed woman, and everybody believed her. Nobody stopped her, except for the professors. I mean, the poor professors at Stanford that were like, no, this can't be done.
It's like the ultimate halo effect.
Yeah.
Example.
And they kind of passed her off and were like, well, if she doesn't believe me, that woman in the beginning of the documentary is like, she'll listen to this other man, higher up in a
Right.
different department more specifically, and, he was actually very charmed by her.
Which I think is odd, because I remember the first time I heard her voice, all I could think of was Mira Sorvino in Romy and Michelle's high school
Right.
reunion. That
So
weird,
what is that about?
this weird guttural voice.
It's an affect. That's not natural, right? So what is
Yeah.
that presenting in her? I mean, that's...
Well, they theorize that she said, oh, powerful men speak in a deep voice,
Right.
ending each sentence down,
Okay.
on a down swoop.
Man, did she take that literally?
And
or
she-
what?
yeah, and then,
But then
you
she
know,
comes out sounding like this surfer dude half
Yeah.
the time. It's really odd.
it's bizarre.
So weird. I would think that has to be... I'm wondering how these all will be considered. She's awaiting trial right now. As we know, that'll happen next year. It's taking a long time. I'm curious how this will all play into her sentencing. And
Yeah, it's
I mean,
interesting.
gonna have
She's
a big legal
radically
team.
changed her look. Like
I've
there's a
heard.
radical change in her look. So she was going for the Steve Jobs.
Black
with
turtleneck.
Black turtleneck
Yeah.
with kind of the like, oh, I'm an eccentric, intelligent, kind of crazy hair. And now she's like this soft sort of soccer mom look. Very interesting.
So she's a bit of a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
We'll keep our eye on her. Is there anything else you want to clarify that would be helpful for us to know in terms of labels, identity, these phrases that we toss around in the true crime sphere all the time that you think would be important for us to know or to do better?
I would just throw out a blanket, give it some thought before we start taking diagnostic phrases that we've heard and applying it to ourselves or to someone else in a way in which it may offend the person that's sitting next to you if they really have struggled with that or have known someone who has.
Right, so just sensitivity.
Yeah, sensitivity. Like, we all say that we're OCD because we need to have things lined up straight or clean or whatever.
And that is so diminishing to people who actually have the diagnosis of OCD, who are, their lives are so severely impaired by
Right,
that.
right.
And that's just one. Like, oh, I've got PTSD. No,
That was the other
you
one I
don't
did
have
want to bring up
PTSD.
about trauma. And
Yeah.
certainly on some level we all experience micro traumas or feel traumatized, but what is that difference between actual PTSD? I mean, that could be a whole podcast, so not really like the full answer,
Right.
but the qualifiers, we're not all traumatized.
No, and a lot of us are exposed to trauma, but the human race is very, very resilient. I mean, if you're exposed to a true traumatic incident, maybe at a high end, 30% could develop PTSD. The rest of
Okay.
us bounce back really well. But it shouldn't diminish others' experiences.
Right.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I think that's a good place to end. But before you go, I like to ask all my guests, what is keeping you up at night? Just literally, the weather, the sounds of crickets, coyotes. I've been in California 2 days. I've seen one. It was the thrill. Or, it might be something really that's causing some anxiety before you sleep. But if you would be willing to share, what is keeping you up at night?
Nothing on an anxious level right now.
That's good.
So stuff that I've been able to enjoy. I guess Ryan Murphy's keeping me up. Everything that
Are
he
you watching
makes
The
right
Politician?
now. Binge The Politician.
Yep.
Watching American Horror Story 1984 right now.
Oh.
So everything he puts out, I'm taking
Keeping you
it.
up at night. All right, good answer.
For me, this is going back to a podcast that really, really disturbed me, in spite of all what I'm exposed to on a daily basis. The podcast entitled Cold,
Oh, yeah. It's a good
about
one.
Josh
It's
Powell
tough.
and what was his wife's name?
Susan.
Susan Cox Powell.
And I think I traumatized a couple of coworkers because I was like, hey, I hear this is good. Let's all listen to it. And
Wait,
like,
did you just say you traumatized them?
I did.
But
Well,
did you
Shannon,
Stop
actually-
doing that.
Well, Shannon, one of the detectives I work with, I mean, she came in. We both came in after a weekend. And I think we had both marathoned like 3 or 4 episodes back to back.
They're pretty intense.
They're so intense, and the thing that keeps me up about that is that, and for anybody listening, be careful about listening to this podcast because it's amazing and profound, and you learn so much about people that should never have been allowed to have children.
Yeah.
Really, really disturbed individuals, and how everything that could possibly go wrong in the investigation went wrong.
Yeah.
And all the systems, law enforcement, Department of Child and Family Services, everything that was there to protect people were doing their best.
Yeah, I was going to say not for lack of trying.
No,
on
everybody
most
tried.
people's
But that
parts.
to me is like what's unnerving is like, oh wait, everything was in place that should have kept this from happening,
Yeah.
and it still happened. And that it haunts me. After
Yeah.
as a year ago, I started listening to it.
That one does stay with you.
Yeah.
Listen with caution, but do listen. It's an important story, but it stays with you.
Well, can I end on that? then?
Please.
One of the things that disturbed me most, and without giving spoilers or anything, Susan, this young woman, this young mother who disappeared, she knew that her husband was going to be involved
Yes.
in the end of her life, and she was caught not feeling like there was any way out. She had prepared a file with journal entries and recordings of everything she was concerned about. She left a trove of evidence, and yet she didn't just get up and leave. And you know, we make that little, for victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence, why don't they just get up and leave? Because it's never simple. There are financial issues, there's emotional issues that prevent that, and we can't minimize those. But at the same time, it was just heartbreaking, like, that anyone in that position, you're preparing for your own death because you feel like the person you're sleeping next to is probably going to be the one that takes you out. I just
She
thought
had
that was
letters
horrific.
written to coworkers to find in the case of her absence, going missing, or death. It's hard to get the head around.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Before you guys go, where can people find LA Not So Confidential, and any updates on the podcast and social media, just places to find you?
Our latest update is that we're now a part of Crawl Space Media, so we are a part of the network that brings you Missing Maura Murray, Incel, the Incel podcast, which is fantastic, Criminal Perspective, Crawl Space. So that's very exciting that was our goal for the year, to be part of the network. No.
No, okay, sorry.
And yeah, they can find us on anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. LANotSoConfidential.com,
Facebook, Instagram, also over social
Yeah,
media.
you can find
We're putting it all in the show notes.
Yes, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh, for killing the small talk and starting a dialogue.
Thank you for coming to Los Angeles.
Oh, anytime.